This is Van Electric Ghost, and we're live on the air with Aly Brandon Vredenburgh. Is that the right way?
Vredenburgh, yes.
Vredenburgh. And you're an author, researcher, and mental health advocate. And I want to welcome you to the Family Electric Ghost podcast. How you doing tonight?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Pretty good. I'm gonna pull some stuff out of my I was a sociology major at Bowdoin College, so I'm gonna pull a couple of things out. Probably not at your level, but I do have some understanding. So I want to talk about your story, but before I get to that, I always ask every guest a couple of questions. I'd ask any guest on the show, and one of the first questions we ask is, "What motivates you, and why do you do what you do?"
Well, those are really great questions to start off with. I will say I've always been kind of a motivated individual. And I can remember actually, do you remember those scholastic book fairs in high school and elementary school?
Yeah, I was always getting these newsletters. Actually, I was in the like at my schools. They had these little newsletters, and you could order the books. And I remember we actually would get them like weekly, and we put in our orders in with the teacher.
Yeah, I loved the book fairs and I was in elementary school and I think I had $5 in my pocket that my mom gave me that day and I go into the little, lounge where you can buy different books and little pencils and cute little erasers. And there was this poster that I saw, and it was of this adorable puppy. So that was what caught my interest. But on the poster, it said, "Dream big."
Hmm.
And I put that poster in my bedroom as a kid, and I would look at it every day. It was across the room from my bed. So every morning I'd wake up and I'd see that poster, "Dream big." And it's funny now because as I'm kind of building my career, that's kind of the thing I keep thinking is dream big. And I've been just so motivated, I think, by personal experiences. I've
Hmm.
been through a lot and I've been motivated to turn power into pain. I mean, pain into power
Yeah,
because I think a lot of people sit with shame and pain and disappointment, and sometimes we don't know what to do with it. And I've really made it my mission to do good with what I've learned.
that's interesting because a lot of times I've talked to creative people in this space on the podcast, and singer songwriters, poets, artists, graphic artists, all actors. We all have something in common, and we channel traumatic experiences into art.
Yeah.
And artists and creatives, we kind of, that's our wheelhouse. But a lot of times people who don't feel that they're creative don't know how to channel those things, where the
Right.
creative people tend to, that's their cathartic behavior, is like jumping on a piano, being an actor, being a painter, doing whatever that creative space is. We can turn those things, and we can take the inner and the outer, and synthesize it. But like other people, they need to talk to therapists and talk to people to get permission structures to decide how they're going to handle this stuff in their life.
Yeah. Well, I've definitely been to a lot of therapists, so I've definitely done that work as well. But a little bit about me, I struggled with depression from a young age. I had a traumatic brain injury at 8 years old. I was in a ski accident, and that's when I noticed things started to shift for me. And I don't think it was necessarily that I broke half my face in an accident. I think it was the loneliness that I occurred in my life after the fact because I was out of school for so long that I just, came back and didn't feel connected to people anymore. It was a really, really profound experience for a little 8-year old. But I think it's interesting looking back because that was even before like smartphones. I think I got my first flip phone when I was 12, and that was when I think the BlackBerry started coming out and all the cool new tech. But I know that really at the heart of my depression early on was chronic pain and loneliness. And so that's kind of what had fueled a lot of my research. And I ended up getting into research really young. I was 14 and I won the science fair with my research in mental health. And from there, every year I did my science fair project on um, various aspects of mental health. I had some research published. And then that's kind of what fueled me to go into college in sociology because I've just been fascinated by people.
That's interesting because I got into sociology and probably for a different angle, but as a creative person, I was just interested in liberal arts. So I was focusing on sociology and political science, and I kind of had double major. But one of the things I always like was really interesting because I was an artist too. I play music, and I tried to use some of that liberal arts learning to kind of give left right brain, be informed about certain things, and then use it in my writing. And I always thought that the idea of like concept of anomie, which I learned about when I was at Bowdoin, that general idea, which I'll kind of put up for people what I know about, is the breakdown of social norms and values within a society or among individuals. And I think a lot of people probably are maybe that came from this sociologist, but a lot of people are suffering from that. And maybe don't know what it is, or haven't like dove into it, or understand like what they're feeling. But did you come into that point of view, or you're more on the Weber side, or you looked at everything?
Oh, I love that you're mentioning sociologists because there's so many interesting ones like Durkheim, Weber. Yeah, I remember reading about all of their theories. Even John Gottman, I think his name, with the theory of
Hmm.
dramaturgy, right, where we're all kind of putting on a performance.
Yeah.
um, I think that maybe there was some enemy happening with me. There's a lot of layers to my story. I found out just a couple years ago that a lot of the chronic pain I was having was from undiagnosed celiac disease.
Mm.
And if you know anything about inflammation, inflammation actually plays a huge role in mental health. Chronic pain is very much tied to mental health struggles, and I think that was definitely part of why I felt so much frustration with our system was because I was often dismissed with my pain symptoms as mental health issues, but I think they were kind of, they had this
I
dance
think I
going
heard.
on.
Yeah.
So after switching to a gluten-free diet, I am living a completely different life. It's actually amazing. So that was definitely another piece of kind of what I write about in my book. But I don't think even those things, my own personal struggles, that wasn't what made me write a book.
Hmm.
Um, I I think you talk to a lot of authors and they'll tell you how much time and effort and stress there is going into writing a book, and you have to have a lot of motivation to reach that finish line. And I would say that the motivation for me is actually because of my best friend. And I grew up with this girl, and she and I were in orchestra together, and she's probably one of the most beautiful people you'd ever meet. She's just so funny. Her laugh can just fill a room. Just her laugh makes people laugh. It's that type of laugh. And we both played violin together. I saw her every week, every Saturday. We went to San Diego Youth Symphony. We were both in like a pretty prestigious orchestra, and so we both. It's funny because we didn't really take it too seriously because we didn't like the competition aspect of it. We just wanted to go there, have fun, play music, and kind of appease our parents too. Our parents really wanted us to be, top violinists. But she and I both also struggled with depression. And I grew up with her and I watched both of our stories unfold. And right when 2020 hit, she was very isolated, and so was I.
Hmm.
And she didn't have a lot of access to seeing her friends. She lived about 3 hours from me. I saw her every couple of weeks when I had time off of work, but I didn't get to see her as much. And unfortunately, she passed away during COVID, and I had to go to her funeral over Zoom. And I didn't get to say goodbye. And it was probably one of the hardest things I've ever been through. And I think that was the beginning of my journey towards trying to create change in the system.
So you felt like that, like a lot of times it is a kind of this like event happens in your life. You have this crucible moment, then I've talked to a lot of creative people because I've done like 1,000 episodes of the show, mostly creative people, and there usually is this impetus that comes from this kind of crucible moment that the light bulb goes off, or something happens in your life, and it makes you like take it to the where you have that permission structure. I'm gonna complete this thought. Yeah, I'm gonna go and do this work. I have this reason to do it. So you're on a mission, and you finally get it done. And that kind of separates the procrastination from people who actually put the work in the world.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
No, this the book that you out of focus?
It is. It is. Yeah.
And yeah, it seems like there's a lot of issues with Gen Z, but I mean, I think I'm a child of the '70s, and and I dealt with the baby boomers, and we've got a lot of issues with like people
Mhm.
with the different sociological group, the different generations. They have this baggage that they carry, and sometimes it bleeds into the next generation, or it bleeds back and forth, a two-way street. And you're wondering, like, people need to like when you put something out like this book, you start to focus on the idea of mental health. Because I grew up with like grandparents and people who said, "Well, suck it up." Like this, they didn't really think it was valid to go to a psychologist or go to a sociologist or do any of that kind of work that wasn't in their wheelhouse.
Right. Right. Yeah. Gen Z, we've grown up in a really interesting time.
So did you feel like when you started to like you said you'd been a therapist, so you did felt like there was that was something you could approach. You didn't have like what happened when I grew up. A lot of that it was like, oh, you don't do that. You but I see now with my daughter, she's 25, and she's like, she sees the therapist all the time. There doesn't seem a lot of people in her generation, they don't seem to have that barrier.
Yeah, therapy's definitely become more normalized. I remember in high school, it was very taboo. People still were not wanting to talk about mental health at all. And now it's definitely become more normalized. I mean, a lot of podcast sponsors is BetterHelp, which is
Yeah.
a therapy platform. So I think in that way, like you podcasters, you guys are getting the word out there, whether you know it or not. But yeah, it's definitely become more normalized. The thing that's tricky about it, though, is that we have more education and awareness about mental health, and more people are seeking help. But what's interesting is that the numbers still continue to rise. And that's kind of what I talk about in my book is like there are a lot of social issues where if you bring awareness to them and you educate people, suddenly those issues go away. But with the mental health crisis, especially in young people, that's not fixing it. And so, what I talk about in my book is kind of the things that we need to do to address the root causes because education alone is not doing the trick.
Yeah, I think it was also like if you have a Western society, like at least a capitalist society, even if you get down to you look at your health plan. If you look at a health plan, you got a job and you get a health plan. Most of the time, the mental health coverage, oh yeah, you get 12 visits. Like I'm a type 2 diabetic. Nobody limits my visits for my diabetes to 12 visits. It's whatever is needed to handle my diabetes. And I was a cancer survivor too. I had a level 3 sarcoma. It's like whatever I needed to take care of my cancer, that's what happened. But mental health is like what? Who did some actuary determine that you only need 12 visits? I think that's a structural problem, in that the society has measured it to not be the same as other illnesses. So that you have like a structural concept where even if there's learning, even if there's education, there still seems to be a structural foundational issue.
Exactly. You're exactly right. I think that there is absolutely a disparity in healthcare. And we have a lot of people in our government that like to say there is a mental health parity, but that's just not what's happening, right? I mean, it's amazing because even if insurance does cover mental health services, for a lot of people, the copay is still too much for them. I
Yeah,
mean, if you think about the average American who's living paycheck to paycheck, how the hell are they going to pay a $20 copay when they can barely afford groceries? It's honestly still
yeah,
really, really difficult.
it's priced out. I mean, you think about the level, like all healthcare has been kind of like when I first got, I'm at age 57. When I was first diagnosed with cancer back in the 90s, my healthcare plan paid pretty much all of it. My wife now had cancer, and we had to pay like tens of thousands of dollars with insurance. So,
Wow.
like the structure, like for the working person, they have been transferring the cost of care, and it's not getting better. It's actually worse in terms of what you have to pay and what your benefit is and inflation is. So we have a structural problem in our economy where we have that kind of robber baron structure where the top is getting the highest percentage since like the 20s,
Mhm.
since the 1920s. Our structure of our society is the billionaire oligarch kind of robber baron class is getting all the funds,
Mhm.
and the working people are getting the least amount of funds, the least amount of benefits, least amount of vacation time. So if you look at the stressors, you have less income, less benefits, more cost, more stress, more pressure. So like every day you're getting hit on your cell phone with all these pressures of the world. And before, like when I grew up, you had four TV channels. Now your phone is pinging you with all these crises all day long. Like so, the stress load getting hit with is pretty high.
I feel like you're taking the words right out of my mouth. I totally agree with you. It's phenomenal how many people can sit there and judge Gen Z when in reality our our lives are so different because of the economy.
Yeah,
It's interesting because our parents are expecting us to be able to live the American dream, but that's just not reality for Gen Z anymore. If you look at inflation, if you look at the cost of college and student loans and housing, of
yeah.
course it's like of course we're struggling because wages haven't gone up. I had a conversation with my mom about how much she was being paid out of college, and it was literally the same as what's being offered now for jobs. And I'm
Yeah,
like, well,
there's no pay raise. I mean, if you look
yeah.
at it, like the general public has been stuck at a certain level for like the last 30 years, right? Where the top managers, the top tier is getting obscene amounts of money. Like I work in a day job as a software designer. It's a good job. I get six figures. So people say, "What's your problem?" Well, for inflation, they haven't increased my rate with the cost of inflation, right, for the last like 20 years. Because the cost of healthcare, to get an example, I got a family of three. My healthcare used to be like 600 a month. Now it's like 2,200 a month. So even at six figures, that's a large percentage of income. And
Right.
so they're taking all the fun out. I mean, you can't go on vacation, you can't do extra things because they're taking all the cash from the workers from the and then the kids are getting saddled with like 100,000, $200,000 if you go get a master's degree of debt before you even get a house. So the kids coming out in the 70s didn't have that level of debt. Kids
Right.
coming out in the 80s didn't have, in the 90s. I came out in the 90s out of Bowdoin. I didn't have that kind of debt load at all.
Right.
The people need to look at what's going on. It's like, how are you going to be expected to do better than your parents if you got a debt load that's equal to a house before you have a house?
Exactly. So that's kind of why I talk a lot about capitalism and economics in my book because I think that's something that a lot of people don't take into consideration when they think about mental health. Because at the core of having good mental health, the very bare minimum we need to do is have our basic needs met. But
Mhm.
currently in our world, it's very, very difficult. A lot of people aren't getting enough quality sleep because of light pollution. A lot of people are being constantly exposed to too many toxins because our streets are full of cars and our detergents and our dish soap and our perfumes and everything, our foods, the microplastics, we're just being flooded with a whole bunch of issues. We're lonely. We're incredibly lonely, and it's incredibly difficult to have a social life if you're barely making ends meet and you've got to work two jobs, or you're burned out because you're working really hard and barely getting by. It's like, of course, people are lonely and isolated, and then experts want to go off and blame social media and our phones. And if you actually look at data, the suicide rates, they started climbing in 2007. And I think it's a really interesting thing to point out because that was really, I think Facebook just launched, Instagram was not out yet.
Mhm.
Maybe MySpace was out for like a year or two. It was really like Snapchat was not out yet. But the things that were happening were shifting in our media, like our movies, our TV shows. And those things are kind of displaying what's happening culturally. And those shifts are being now reflected in social media. But what I argue is more that social media is not a root cause, but more a form of escapism. And
Yeah.
that people are using their phones to escape their lives because things are really bleak right now. And instead of going out and spending time with people, it can feel really empty when you're already feeling really disheartened and disillusioned by the way the state of the world is.
I remember when I was growing up, you go to the mall, you go to the movies, you go see a band, you go see some indie band. I was growing up seeing bands like REM or Funkadelic. People go to a college and watch an independent band and to kind of hang out. And it seems like things started to shift. And I don't know if it's because of like video games and music. I kind of see two tracks going on. Like once the video games came and you have the Xboxes and the PS5s and all these systems, people started, and you actually check it, people spend more money on those gaming systems than they do on music. Music, people pay $70 for a game, but they don't want to pay $20 for a record. I grew up in the age of albums where people would go to a record store and pay 15, 16, $18 for a record and then share those records and hang out and talk. You listen to Pink Floyd in the basement with five of my friends. Now people just go and play like games online and that's a solitary kind of behavior. And maybe they connect to like some gaming system, but it's not the same as going to see a band on a Friday night or a Saturday night and hanging out with people and physically meeting. So I think it's like some of the technology shift might have made people put people in different spaces.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think too there's something to be said about a creativity crisis that's happening, and it's been happening for a while, believe it or not. There's this researcher named Dr. Kim, and they looked at, I think it was over 200,000 people and creativity over a large span of time. And what they found was that creativity has been declining since the 1990s. And what we know about creativity is that it's incredibly important for mental health, expression, wellness. And if you look at our priorities as a nation, it really aligns with when we started prioritizing like star testing and numbers in our school system instead of, things
Arts.
that really matter, the arts.
Yeah,
And
I've always been a big argument to me is like I've always continued to do music, even though I do software engineering. And I know a lot of people around me who are in that space, but in order to kind of balance out, they do theater or they do painting, they do music, they do other things. But I've seen another generation of people come along and they don't have any arts, right? They're
yeah,
just totally involved in the job, and the job is taken over like 90% or 110%, and they don't go off and have a band on the side or do plays on the side or do art on the side. They're just totally singularly focused and downplay the value of art, where art to me has been the savior for a lot of the people I hang out with are artists. My whole family are artists. My wife is a playwright, my daughter is a graphic artist. We focused that was a cool thing to do. So she's able to be an artist. And I didn't downplay and say, go get a real job. Which a lot of people I see do is they say, oh, that's not a real job. Go be an accountant, go be an actor, go be a doctor, go be a lawyer. They can't see the art as having value. But to me, the only value of getting up in the morning a lot of times is to go and look at art, to get into art. That's why I get up every day because of art.
Yeah, I feel you. I've been working actually as a professional artist since I was like um, truly since I was about 18, but I've been doing art my whole life, and I actually run a therapeutic art program at a high school after school program. And what I've seen through my work is just how powerful art really is and how healing it is. And I like to tell this story. I had this student who came in the first day of this program I started, and she had her hood on. She was looking down. She hardly even said hello to me. I said hi to her. I was like, "Hello, like welcome to class. So happy to have you here." And she's like, "Hello." And by the end of the school semester, she was doing more art. She was showing me her art, and I kid you not, this really really shy girl was going up to other students and putting her art on top of their art and like collaborating, and it
Yeah.
was just such an amazing thing to see because it really shows that when you are creative and you have this outlet and you're with other creatives, it's so powerful and it's so connecting and
It's like
it
infectious. It's not in a good way. They
yeah.
because like to me, it's like it's the collaborative effort of being around in a room of a lot of musicians. Like if I go in a room with musicians, we're like, oh, we start talking about what we like, and then we start saying, hey, could we collab? And then things come out of nowhere, right? They start working on things with people, and we don't even talk about money most of the time. It's like we just, if I have an opportunity to play with somebody, I'm not even going to ask about it. I just want to do it because I like art, I like music. So a lot of musicians will like we get ripped off because sometimes we don't think about the monetary thing. We think it's like, oh, if I get a chance to play, then I'll just do that. That's always the first thing, and we always got to keep in the back of our head. It's like, well, I got to pay bills too. But the idea of that the art coming first is usually like in the mindset of an artist. That's where it is, right? And to see people who devalue that don't think they should have a music program, they should have an art program, that everything's got to be STEM. And I'm in science. I'm in software design. I understand the importance of logic and mathematics, but there's a lot of art in what we do in software engineering. And we have a lot of people who have art backgrounds. So when you don't have that, what I find is some people who don't have that don't seem to be all there, right? They miss things that the people who have the more a balance in their life of art being there seem to be able to see things that the people who don't focus on that can't see. And that in itself is valuable. And you have to, I always promote that to business people to understand that you can't just be narrowly focused. You have to be more holistic.
Exactly. Exactly.
But, like, is it hard today to get, do you work with school systems or do you work with, like, more private programs in terms of education when you work with people? Are you finding it more difficult to push some of the things you're trying to do if people have these very rigid ideas about what education is?
Well, it's really difficult because a lot of these programs are grant funded. And I know for me, I'm really scared. I'm going to lose my program this year because of the grant. It's a government funded grant. And
Yeah,
with everything that's happening right now, I'm fearful.
yeah,
And so, yeah, it's really difficult because often grants specifically really like to see numbers. And when you're doing a program that's really creative, it's really hard to put out data about it, right?
yeah. But the thing
S
about spreadsheet will show, like, a number, but it doesn't really show the value,
right,
and the arts will get totally ripped off in that scenario. Because you
right.
can't really show the value of teaching somebody how to play a guitar or piano or teaching a kid how to be a drama student, right? It's hard to actually show some kind of metric. And
Yeah.
I think the problem is we have with some of these, the tech bros is they like to be the so big thing in tech is the disruptor mindset. You come in and you break something and you go to see whether or not what's really necessary to make that work. And usually what ends up happening is you go with the bare bones thing that makes it work, but then all the arts, all the softer stuff, well, that maybe you can get away with not having that and it'll work. Or maybe on the surface it works. And they don't see the value in anything that's not like core, working workflow. So they'll wreck everything. And we're in this disruptor age where they say, "Oh, this, I will just break it and see what happens." And I'll hire back the people that are necessary to bare bones it. And and people will say, "Well, to me, it's like the idea of this. It's like the fire department shouldn't run like a business because when
Mhm.
there's a fire in the poor neighborhood, you need to put that out. And even just because they're poor, you should not put it out. If you try to make something like that for profit, the whole city could burn down." And they don't seem to have that understanding anymore.
I love the way you describe that, and I love that metaphor, like the putting out a fire, because it's completely like such a great like way of describing it. Because it's like if you don't put out the fire, the city's gonna burn down. You got to put it out. So yeah,
Yeah, they
that's
would
a
go for a private fire force, right? Like, you're gonna go for like, what private company would actually take care of an F5 tornado in the Midwest if you don't pay them? There's no profit in taking care of that, right? There's no profit in a Category 5 hurricane being handled, right, by a for-profit company.
right,
So there's some things that are kind of basic government concepts that, like, yeah, it doesn't make a profit, but it needs to be there. And
right,
the arts are like the biggest, like, issue because we don't make anything on the metrics board. The
right,
data visualizations won't show us unless you get very creative and you point out, if you do some hard work with like a PhD could point out that it does have value, and they could make an argument, but it's probably too hard for you to comprehend that argument, and you won't get a lot of adoption.
right. Yeah, everything you're saying actually really aligns with what I write about in my book because basically, I view this mental health crisis as that fire. It's this fire that is not being put out effectively, and they keep, putting on, a gallon of water here and a gallon of water there, and they're not really doing what's going to address the actual fire and how to actually put it out. And so, exactly this idea that we need to create solutions that won't necessarily make anyone money, which is what our economy is built on, is who's going to get their money, right? But
Mhm.
um, really, it's what's the cost of not doing the right thing, and
Well,
that's really yeah.
I think what you have to point out on GDP is like if you start to run some GDP numbers in economics, you start to point out that diversity, right? You might think that that actually goes against GDP. But
Mhm.
when you actually check the numbers and you do a realistic, like, fair study, the more diverse your society, the better your GDP is. So
Yeah,
it's counterintuitive with the people who think the less diverse, the more economic growth you're going to have. So that is a false concept. It's an ideology. It has no facts behind it. When you actually go and do the work, you show that the diversity actually makes you money. But
right,
it's counterintuitive to an ideology that says that that's not true. It's the same thing with the softer things like art, because the arts open your mind so that you go and do something in that's more like outside the bell curve. If you're neurodivergent, if you're an artist, you tend to do stuff that's not in the normal kind of path of that bell curve. And at first, people will say they hate it, but the innovations are always not loved when they first show up. And
right,
that's where a society that's very productive has a lot of innovators, has a lot of creativity, and there's things that don't necessarily make profit at day one, but year 5, year 10 down the line, it starts to actually pay off. They're
right.
investments that you make in a society, and you have to have some cultural investment, societal investment, and make people understand that that's critical to forward
Yeah.
movement.
Yeah, yeah. So just to give you a little bit of stats here, our mental health problems, they cost our economy about $282 billion a year just in America, and it's more, internationally. And so I propose 6 solutions in my book that would basically save us billions if we were to enact them. And I think that that's really where at least our all of the past administrations have gone wrong. Even Obamacare, if you look at it, you can criticize that too. It was a great step forward, but it was still under a private insurance system, which
Yeah.
means there were still people who are trying to get their money. And
Oh, yeah.
so,
To
yeah.
me, a for-profit, like the problem with for-profit insurance, because I work in insurance, is that underwriters try to not cover. That's their whole job, is to not give you cover. So if they take the Hippocratic Oath, you're supposed to do no harm, you're supposed to help. But the business model is that I don't want to pay. I'm going to get out of paying. So it's diametrically opposed to the Hippocratic Oath. So if you want more people to be efficient and productive, having a for-profit healthcare system that actually doesn't give people care and lets them fall off the cliff actually goes against the profitability, which you said you run the numbers. Like, so people are being very short-sighted for certain sectors to make profit. Their overall knocks our GDP down. And because people are not looking holistically at the whole thing, even though these are so-called smart people, they're looking at very narrow slices and not looking at the whole thing. If they actually were honest and looked at the whole thing, it's like I say, like being a cancer survivor, volatile organic chemicals are big time cancer causers. They're in the
Yes.
air, they're in the water. Probably one of the reasons I got my sarcoma was because of it. And so I've been a big advocate to get rid of volatile organic compounds and to have, what is an acceptable level of a VOC. Chemical companies want you to have a level that probably causes cancer and then say you can't prove it.
Yeah.
So, all the damage that is done is not in the price of the product. If the product was priced with the damage it does, then that product would not be profitable. So we are
Right.
not being given the full picture. And so, like, you have radical concepts like what I'm trying to talk about, but that's what's going on. It's like things are not being priced at what the damage they do. So things are being put into the world that have an artificial price that cause damage, that cause harm, and things are not being valued that actually have value. So, we've got to get it. It's a radical concept, but people need to open their eyes and not just listen to, podcast bros and tech bros telling you one thing.
Yeah, yeah. You know what's interesting too? I write about VOCs in my book because they're famous for cancer, but they're also impacting mental health, and that's something that isn't really talked about. And so I kind of talk about toxins. That's one of the chapters in my book because it's something that we don't really like to talk about because the people who profit because of them. And I mean, you look at our food, you look at our air, you look at our schools. I mean, they spray our schools with Roundup and
Yeah, and that stuff.
insecticides.
That wonder why people are getting leukemia. Wonder why kids are getting like childhood cancers. And you've got these VOCs, you've got these carcinogens all over the place, and you've got people who get people to vote against their own interest because they somehow think if I have a regulation from the EPA, it's going to keep me from getting a job. Fact is, most of that factory is automated, and you're not really going to get a job anyway, right? So the idea that you're going to somehow, if you vote against your interest to keep the air clean and the water clean and the food pure, right? That you're going to get a job from that. The evidence is there's no evidence that you're getting a job from that lack of regulate, from them not enforcing the law. Like if you've enforced the law, like are you not going to get the job? Well, you weren't going to get the job either way.
Right,
so
right.
so people are kind of vote against their own interest, So because they somehow think it's going to be a Horatio Alger that you're going to be Bill Gates. Highly
Yeah.
unlikely you're going to get the money of Bill Gates or Elon Musk or any of these guys.
Yep.
It's more doable that maybe you could go and straight your own small business and you're never gonna hit that kinda number, but you
Right.
could do well for yourself. But the idea that you're gonna get to be the super billionaire is highly unlikely, but there doesn't mean that you would be happy. You
Mhm.
could just be happy if you could have your own self-determination, right? If you could control your life and have, like, like, organic food, have a nice place to live, have what you need, maybe not what you want, but the things that you need, what things that your body needs, things that your health needs, maybe you can live a good life.
Yeah, people don't need that much to be happy. That's the interesting thing. I think we've been taught that we have all these different things we need, like fancy designer clothes and a private jet, but that's just it's ass backwards. I mean, really, if you I met this guy a couple of days ago. He's called the Laughing Buddha, and he was talking about how he grew up in a cave. Laughing monk. He's a monk. He grew up in this monastery.
Mhm.
He literally, this man, like, literally has only eaten lentils and like a few other things his whole life. He's never had pizza. I mean, he's like just,
Yeah,
but
monk life,
he's
yeah.
so happy, and
But
he doesn't have much.
but it's all
Has like,
perspective. Like, I lived in Japan, and I lived in Tokyo, so that's kinda like not like living out in the boonies in Japan. You could run into people who are more like, living Shinto life, like a Shinto life, more agricultural life, more outside the city, different mindset. But even within Tokyo, there was the people had this Eastern mindset of, doing Tai Chi during the day, you know, and and taking time to do that in the middle of a city like that. And I would see these parks where people were doing Tai Chi and taking mental health breaks or physical health breaks. And I was like, wow, that's an amazing thing to deal with. Because then you're just wait a second, I just had something bother me. But yeah, it just gives you a different perspective outside of your own cultural perspective. Like if you go into a different worldview that looks at things at maybe a slower pace, like if you go to Central America or South America, people will take a siesta, or they won't be so time focused like the way we are here in the West. Is like, oh, yeah, like they actually take time for themselves, for their body to rest, to rejuvenate. Where we kind of stress ourselves out to the max, where we just fall apart, we just crash with like no understanding. Is like, don't you read your body?
what sucks though is a lot of us, at least in Gen Z, is we feel like we have to stretch ourselves to the max, because it's like really, really difficult to have our basic needs met here with the
Mhm.
way the system is set up. I mean, getting even housing, even an apartment here where I live, like the average apartment is like over $2,500 a month. And that's like really, really difficult to make enough money to be able to afford that and your basic needs on top of insurance, on top of like everything else. So it's interesting, because if we had a different standard of living and more affordable housing, I think it would make things just so much better for us. But
Yeah,
you
if you
know,
go back to the 40s, right? You go back to what like FDR did. And we're having this big fight in our society because of what FDR did from a political science point of view. People were mad about what he did with the great, with the New Deal. The whole idea about the New Deal was like from the brink of the Great Depression. You're gonna get people off the street, and they're gonna build the Hoover Dam. They're going to build aqueducts. They're going to build bridges. They're going to build structure. You're going to take people who are dying. You're going to give them some sense of security with Social Security. You're going to make it dignified that elderly people aren't going to die in the gutter. And there were rich people from that point. There's certain people that it's like, oh, you should just let it be what it was. What you should let it be like what happened in the Great Depression. And they still have that mindset. And we're living in a mindset where we're gone back to like 1928, where people think that the whole structure that FDR created was unnecessary. until it's necessary. It's basically going to put us back to a situation where it's going to be necessary again. And so, because people don't
Yeah.
learn from the history, and I feel like the political science and the sociology is kind of combined. That's why I took both when I was in school. But it's like you do need to learn
Yeah.
from what happened in the past is repeating itself. We're running back into this era, like I talk about robber barons. We're in a robber baron age, like the Gilded Age. People talk about that because we're back in a Gilded Age,
Yep.
and people need to understand the connection and start taking their own interest at heart and look at other systems. Like look at other systems, like even European systems where people like you get college, you can have a sense of like affordability, a sense of like healthcare, and you can make arguments. Oh, was maybe it's not as good, whatever. But at the end of the day, you have some basic societal benefits as a citizen that we're just told that we just got to go out that wild west and maybe you get it and maybe you don't.
Yep. Yep.
I don't know if that's what everybody is. I mean, in Generation Z, are they really starting to think like maybe I don't want to do the Wild West?
Yeah, I think we're a lot of us are famous for quiet quitting, and we're tired of it. We don't want to have bosses that don't value our time. We're ready to not work overtime and not be paid for it, and we want to actually start having our basic needs met. So I think a lot of us are really fed up with the system. We are the most politically engaged generation, in history, and I
Yeah,
think it's
Supreme
wonderful.
Court.
It's amazing. I think it's interesting too. There was this therapist I interviewed, and she was talking about how being politically engaged is actually tied to more struggles with mental health, and I think that's actually it's like a double edged sword because we have to know what's going on, but it's also just so depressing
Yeah.
to be caught up in everything that's happening. But I do think it all ties back to what I said in the beginning. We need to channel this pain into power. We need to use what's happening right now as motivation and fuel to fight for better.
Well, I think we're so caught up in individualism in this society that we forgot the power of the people. That the lesson of the 60s and the 70s with the movements, like the civil rights movement, the gay movement, the environmental movement, was people power.
Yep.
And we kind of got tricked into thinking it's all the individual. So
Mm-hmm.
we lost some of our power because people started not believing in the people power. When that's the end of the day, that is the power, right? So if you get a group of friends together and you create a collective, that collective voice has more power than a single voice.
Yep.
That power eventually gets to to your state government, and you get on a school committee, you get the person you want that keeps the book from being banned.
Yeah.
You get the person you want that keeps the labor law so that you get paid for the work you do. So you start
Absolutely.
to get involved at the local level, and maybe you start to see, well, maybe that translates to the state level, it translates to the federal level. So there has to be a cost of citizenship is to, be part of the society where we had a lot of people just drop out and get burned out. But if you do that, there's a well-oiled machine that'll take advantage of that.
Right. Right. And what you're saying right now is pretty much at the heart of my argument in my book is that we've taken mental health as this individual problem for too long. If you look at the history of mental illness and the way we've treated it, it's always been blaming the individual. And really, the heart of what I'm trying to say is this is a community problem, and we need to address it as a community. We need to have more empathy. We need to have more kindness and compassion for the people that are struggling because it's all intersectional. It's all intersectional. And the more we start viewing each other as equals and as like compadres or whatever, like
Yeah.
we're all in this together, and we really need to start helping each other and work on that so that we can prevent what's happening and
Right.
stop following this crisis intervention model. We need to really lean into this holistic prevention based model that we it's like there's obvious things that we could be doing, and we've just let the people that are profiting off of our pain, we were letting them win.
Yeah, because I mean, the problem is like if I get this, Silicon Valley and algorithms. If algorithms are created by like like a tech bro doesn't value art, doesn't value diversity, doesn't value feminism, doesn't value multiculturalism. So they'll build the algorithm to kind of stamp down anything that isn't that they devalue. So then what you see in the ether as being popular is only the things they like.
Yep.
So there's like there are more women than men, right?
Mhm.
How is it that these podcast bros and these tech bros have this like anti-feminist thing is the biggest thing in the media? Because the algorithm is geared toward it.
Yep.
We need to challenge that. We need to get people like from all sides together, not just women, but
Mhm.
minorities and other people who say, why is that voice out shouting
Yep.
everybody else's voice? How is
Yep.
that happening? How does that make any sense that that happens when there's all these other voices and why don't they have equal weight, right? Why can't they get breakthrough? Because we're playing in a game with what we see in this ether. And if people are being artificially suppressed, then they don't feel they're not being they don't even know they're out there. So if
Right.
we can fight to get that connection, that we can pull everybody together and get our voices all heard, then you actually see the real numbers that are out there. And
Right.
then people will listen when they see that there's a number
Yeah.
and it translates to political power and it goes all the things I was talking about before. But
Absolutely. Absolutely. And a lot of this, it's like I write in my book, it's an uphill battle, because a lot of it's gonna take to help people connect again, it's gonna be rebuilding cities. It's gonna be rebuilding trust. It's, ever since we started designing our cities to be towards cars,
mhm,
is honestly, that's when I think things started to
downhill.
degrade. Yeah, I think honestly that's what I would say was the start of it, because that's when people stopped walking to the store and knowing the store owner by name, and it's when things really started to change and we've had less third spaces. We're not going to the library anymore because we have our computers now. We're not connecting. And
That's why
so, yeah.
I remember being in Tokyo and being in Asian cities, right? Like Hong Kong and Tokyo and places. And there's so many walking spaces. Like there's so many places in Tokyo. I could go Akihabara, Shibuya, Ginza. They're designed to walk. And there's all these little micro businesses in Japan because I lived there. But you could go to these little restaurants that can only seat 4 or 5 people, little stores that can only fit a 4 or 5 people. And you would find all these individual businesses and things. And the only way you could find it is you can't be driving around. You have to walk. And in Asia, that's very common that you have these spaces where people are walking and there's all these street food vendors, all kinds of businesses. And there's a lot of connections, like where you're meeting people, you're talking to people, you're engaging. And we used to go out like all the time, like every weekend. My wife and my daughter, we lived in Japan when she was going to preschool. And we had so much fun just being able to connect with all these business owners. And then they would know us by our name. And that to me is like the car really wrecks that. Like having a good public transportation system, like the subway system in Tokyo is amazing. And just even the bus system is like so you between the bus and the subway, you could just go around and you just walk. I never needed a car. The 2 years I was there, I never had a car. I just walked around.
It's awesome. Yeah, I think that's a huge thing that's missing here in America is those walkable cities. And the thing is it goes beyond walkability. It goes beyond third spaces. It's there's a lot of cultural things that are going to happen. But I'm really hopeful. I'm someone that always tries to maintain hope, and the amount of reception I've had over my book and just conversations I've had with people, it's really clear to me that there really is strong support and awareness for this change. And so I'm really hoping that this having these conversations and getting word out there, really hoping it's the start of something better.
Well, I think, like you said, it's like you gotta have kind of a movement of people and a collective of like authors or people, sociologists or writers and people who have this mindset. They, there used to be happenings back in the 60s and 70s. That like multiple artists would get like Warhol, Andy Warhol would get together with like actors, dancers, painters, and have these thing called happenings. And they happened in San Francisco with like different groups would do that, and it was just something about the connection of multiple like paths within the arts of connecting. He had professors, hanging out with Bob Dylan, poets hanging out with Bob Dylan, and people just intellectuals and all kinds of different oddball people just hanging together in different collections of intellectual thought or talk or conversation. It's like, hey, I'm not in your wheelhouse, but why not talk to you? Why not have this conversation? Why don't we have these bridges? Why don't and we instead of having these narrowly focused things, and we want to have people that aren't going to fight, but we don't want to fight a street fight, but we want to have conversations that are productive and movements that actually can cause action and movement and decision making. Because like it's all theoretical, but sometimes it has to come out of your head and actually get put into action.
Yeah,
It can't just be on the page. It actually has to get into the world in some demonstrable method, right?
absolutely. What's funny is you're talking about these intellectual parties, and it made me think of the absolute opposite that's happening, where women are having Botox parties, and we're like so focused on appearance and
Yeah.
looks. And I always like to say that if we spent even half the amount of time we spend on superficial stuff, we would have solved all the world problems. So, yeah,
Yeah, I mean, it's got to get back to like the core of,
yeah,
with surface level stuff is so big.
hmm
I see a lot of the bros, they're all looking for six pack abs. They're on supplements, trying to be this, trying to be alpha that, alpha this, alpha that, king this, king that. I'm like, what about just having an idea? Like, I look for people who have ideas or sounds that are interesting to me. Somebody like, like back in the day, like a Lou Reed and the Velvet Underground, like looking for something like that, looking for somebody pushing it, somebody doing like a Sun Ra, somebody doing like a Hendrix, somebody. And I find people in the world, people say they're not doing it. I find musicians all the time that are doing really interesting things. They're just not blowing up on MTV because there's no MTV. Right?
yeah,
They're not blowing up on the radio because the radio is controlled by some big corporation. But in the underground, there are still these places where people are doing things. And just because you don't hear it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It's like that tree in the forest. It's like it is still a lot of stuff out there. Because
right,
sometimes you have to seek it out.
right. Well, this has just been such a fun conversation. I've really enjoyed talking to you.
Well, I love talking to people who have different points of view, and we have your out of focus book.com link. So if we go there, is that how people can find your book?
Yeah, yeah. And if people want to learn more about all the solutions I write about to our mental health crisis, it's the last two chapters that I really highly recommend reading.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, because we know people sometimes don't have the full attention span, but I always recommend if you get a book, sit down and try to read through the whole book. But if that's your recommendation to check that, then that's fine. That's cool because we understand people who live in this kind of like narrowly focused world. So if that's cool advice because that gives somebody like an outside saying that instead of not picking up the book, they can go find something that's interesting. So I'm glad you pointed that out.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm actually making a film based on my book right now, and I'm working on that. And
Oh wow.
so hopefully, all the people out there who aren't as keen to read will have a way to access the information soon on film.
When would that be released and like what venue?
I will keep that top secret right now, but I'm working on some big things.
That's awesome. Because we know today visually, I mean, that's why we're doing this video version of a podcast. That podcasting used to be audio and still primarily audio, but visual connection is still a good way to do things. So, like, it's interesting that you're converting that to a film. And I love cross genre. I love people who dabble in different ways of presenting material. So I think that's awesome. So when that's ready, let us know, and
Yeah,
we could help premiere it and help you push it out there.
absolutely.
But thank you again for being on the show tonight, and have a good weekend.
Yeah. You too. Thank you so much.
Thank you.